Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk with the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Sarah Westwood, and I'm here today with Editor-in-Chief Hugo Gurdon. And Hugo, you wrote a column this week about the culture of compliance in the U.S. It was a very interesting topic. You talked about how it sort of affects everything from society to the economy. So, let's start with the latter there. How does that growing regulatory state affect businesses?
Yeah, the overarching theme of the piece I wanted to write was about how America is becoming entangled in all its aspects, as you say, in business and in culture and in society, with more and more rules and regulations, and that it's producing this, it's producing a kind of conformity for which the United States was not previously known. When people talk about compliance costs, they're generally talking about businesses having to spend billions and billions of dollars more simply to in the unproductive work of complying with rules and regulations. It's calculated that small businesses spend 3.3 billion hours a year and spend $65 billion a year just complying with the requirements and the red tape of Obamacare. Banks have spent $50 billion additionally each year, year over year, for the 12 years since Dodd-Frank became law. Every hour and every dollar is spent on compliance, and I'm not suggesting that some of these things are not necessary, but every single dollar an hour is a dollar an hour stolen from productivity and creativity. It suppresses or depresses wealth creation. And it's all about jumping through hoops, businesses jumping through hoops to meet regulations, many of which are entirely unnecessary.
You mentioned just now there's also a social aspect to this compliance culture, and in your piece you cite some polling that shows the majority of Americans are afraid of speaking out of turn, that could cost them their jobs, their reputation. Talk about that dynamic.
Right. I wanted to consider the sort of things like cancel culture and the rules and regulations as another aspect of the cost of compliance, because it's measurable in business. It's not so measurable, but it's very apparent in our culture and society. When there's polling over the last several years which shows that very high proportions of the country are worried about speaking their minds, saying what they really think, because people will object and they will get into trouble for it. Now, that anxiety is not equally shared. The majority of really confirmed left-wingers feel free to say whatever they wish. They don't fear cancellation. But even milder liberals, the majority of them, self-censor, and independents, or what were called moderates, something like 64% self-censor, and 77% of conservatives feel that they can't say what they think in case people object and they get into trouble for this. And what I wanted to suggest was the cost of compliance with the new orthodoxy, or the prevailing orthodoxy. The cost is huge. The cost is free speech and intellectual coherence. And it's a huge cultural cost, not measured in dollars, but in the way that America operates, the way that Americans think about themselves.
Finally, during the pandemic, the COVID rules that were enacted across the board required a lot of compliance from people who most of them readily complied. And yet that sort of compliance state when it comes to COVID is deteriorating really rapidly just by the day now. Why do you think that has fallen apart so quickly?
Well, it's fallen apart because it has become apparent over the course of nearly 2 years since we first went out on our 2 weeks to flatten the curve, that a lot of the official explanations for things, the things to which we are supposed to comply, are false. There was, for a very long time, the demand that we comply with the idea that the COVID-19 pandemic started in a sort of an exotic market in China rather than leaking from the lab in Wuhan. Anybody who did not adhere to that orthodox story paid the cost of excoriation. People discussed therapies for COVID, and those therapies which, if you discuss, the people discussing therapies were written about, talked about as, I don't know, white supremacists and misinformation peddlers, and devoted to make America great again, and Trumpists, etc., etc., etc. Now all of these things are in much more mainstream discussion, and the things that we were told with absolute certainty have turned out to be false. The same is true of the wearing of masks. America has traditionally been a free country. People wish to do what they think is best for themselves and their families and their dependents. They do not wish to be bossed around. And the reason that the compliance culture is under assault and appears to be cracking is that the intensity of compliance culture has been so much greater during the 2 years of COVID, and it's been exposed more starkly as unnecessary and burdensome. And so people are rebelling against it. And when people, that is to say voters, rebel, parties start to react, and suddenly you're seeing blue states scrambling to scrap mandates and get in line with where the red states were a year ago.
Well, Hugo, thank you so much for being here today. You can get more writing from Hugo and the rest of the commentary team at WashingtonExaminer.com.